everybody. Thank you very much for your attention and for joining us here at the Energy Centre. I'm Dr. Gregory Wilson. I'm your host on the site here. I'm from CSIRO, so just to give you a little bit of advice around being here this afternoon, we will be here slightly after hours, and so I'm responsible for you, so be nice and follow my instructions. The first instruction I need to give you is about emergency evacuations from here. If we do need to evacuate, follow any CSIRO staff member. You can identify them with CFO badges or with a CSIRO logo here. The main instructions will be mine. If we do need to evacuate this area here, we will go out this door here and we'll gather on the grass outside near the car park. If this happens to be blocked, we'll exit out through the main exit way here. And if needed, there's an auxiliary evacuation point to the rear of the property, but we'll guide you there. If there is an evacuation, you will hear the alarm. It is a two-toned alarm. Because of the audience and we're after hours, the moment we hear the first alarm, we will pack up and evacuate. All right, second to that, I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands in which we meet today, the Awabakal and Warramai people, and pay my respects to their ancestors, past and present. And I'll hand over to Richard Dean, the chair of the Newcastle branch.
All right, thanks, Greg. So welcome to our talk today, our seminar today about wind and solar. We have 50 registrations in person and 150 online. Our first speaker will be Dr. Micah Bell. He's from Squadron Energy. And he's a senior renewables energy engineer in measurements, and he manages the monitoring strategies and equipment for Squadron's projects. So he was just telling me he was in Park Creek in Queensland and going to Gundagai in New South Wales soon. He's got a PhD in environmental engineering, focused on climate indices, cycles, and forecasting, which is similar to the background of our second speaker in terms of forecasting. Okay. And he's interested in both technology best practice as well as high precision modelling to achieve deeper project understanding. And so the first talk will be about on the ground renewable energy rollout, the progress and changes for that. Thanks, Micah.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Great to be here at CSIRO. It's a bit of a special place. Did uni over at Newcastle Uni and saw the Energy Centre. So when it first opened, did tours about the place. Wanting to work in renewables and sustainability before that was such a thing. So undergrad was environmental engineering, and there was no specialisation in this, but could see the little wind turbines over here at the Energy Centre from one of the places that I lived. Yeah, so special to be here. Nice to share this with you all. Being on the team with the Institute of Energy, that the local team has been asking me for a while, so sorry this has taken a few years to come about. We've had lots of change happen with us as an organisation, and I keep running into different engineering friends that you get started on one topic and it just keeps going. So really some of this stuff is for the renewables industry might be fairly common and well known, but outside of that it seems to be that lots of other people don't understand necessarily what we do. So from wind turbine evolution to the way that we measure and model, all of that sort of stuff. I'll jump into this next slide. So also acknowledging country. So thanking the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples looking after the land here, Awabakal and Warramai, and thanking them for their stewardship of this area. And here's just a map of all the different mobs. So the agenda for today, so I'll be talking about the Australia's energy breakdown and renewables progress in it, so how far we've gotten up to date, as well as headwinds and tailwinds. Some of my general commentary, so this is more for interest. It's my humble opinion. It's not everything that is endorsed or the position of Squadron Energy. It will be high level, as I said. It'll be straightforward and pretty accessible. It won't be highly controversial or super detailed. I'll leave that to Helen for getting into more of the site stuff. I do love talking about that side of things as well, but there's just too much content, so I'll keep it high level. So who is Squadron? Some of you may know us already, but so we're a leading renewable energy company. We've got a really big portfolio. So 1.1 gigawatts of renewable energy so far in operations, 900 megawatts in construction. So that's partly Clark Creek, which Richard mentioned before. So that's just past halfway in construction. So 50 of 100 turbines built. And we've got Yungala in early stages of construction as well. We're launching 14 gigawatts of projects by 2030, which represents approximately a third of the 2030 target of 82% that the government's been talking about for a while. And we've also got quite usefully and possibly controversially the PCAP plant. So that's the Port Kembla Energy Terminal, and that's a gas plant. That means that we can bring in gas supplies much quicker than any supply lines. So most of you will love this, so a good energy balance, hopefully all the fellow engineers. So this is for all of Australia. It includes export. So as you can see, that the renewables section just in the side is quite small, but you'll also appreciate all of the electricity mix is quite small compared to the exports. So both gas and coal export absolutely dominate on an energy basis what we do. So where has renewables got to? So we're at 39% as of the end of 2023. So this is from the CEC, and it's quite an interesting breakdown. As you can see, so wind is 13.4%, but that's followed quickly by rooftop solar and by large-scale solar. So, and those two things combined is 18%, so greater than wind. And how are we tracking in terms of emissions? So as you can see, so this is from the Clean Energy Regulator. It has gone down over time. So this is 2011 to 2023. And I've also put in some of the emissions factors. So I've been involved in all the greenhouse gas assessment, the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Act since its inception in 2007. Was working at Energetics and put in some submissions at the time. But you can see how much it's gone down. And on the left, that's NEM-wide, but on the right, that's actually emissions factors per state. And as you can see that the mix is not evenly split. So South Australia is 40% of what it was 10 years ago. So there's a huge amount of change if you look at it on an emissions basis as well, but it's highly different in different areas. So as you can see as well that our renewable energy target is officially 43% by 2030, net zero by 2050. We're currently at the 39%, which I mentioned in the last slide. So we're almost at that first target now. There is the discussion of the government of the 82% by 2030. So that was discussed in terms of increasing the RET. But they've also stated that the Capacity Investment Scheme, the CIS, has taken over this. And so they've chosen that. And most of the arguments for that rather than the RET is the negative pricing. So trying to still provide reliability for the market and investment, but yeah, hopefully without just a wide market that could mean there's lots of certificates that still get done at negative pricing in the middle of the day. So trying to get more wind rather than just more and more solar. In terms of our rollout, so this is a forecast by lovely CSIRO, their Gen Cost, which is one of the best sources of information. And as you can see, this is both current as well as future, so 2030. And importantly, so the solar PV and wind with firming is the cheapest in all of these scenarios. But having said that, in the ideal scenarios of the gas and black coal, it's still fairly close behind. So in all these situations, it looks like things are improving. We can do things better than we used to do. Solar and wind are doing fantastic in terms of price, but potentially, yeah, everybody's doing this slightly better. And I guess the big difference is also the worst case. Not only is that forecast in and of itself, but also you have a learning rate. So the learning rate of onshore wind and solar has steadily declined over time. And as you'll notice in the last couple of years, there's a few years there of higher variability. Importantly, the lower side, the ideal scenarios, is still continuing to decline, which is good. But you've got more variability, which represents financial risk. So more unknowns. There's been some pricing shocks through the system. A lot of that has been attributed to COVID and what that did with supply chains, but potentially there might be other things as well. So internationally, so this is something that many people might be aware of. So the International Energy Agency, their World Energy Outlook is published every year. But importantly, they're quite conservative, but every single year that they publish this, they're having to increase their forecast of what some of these total percentages will be by what stage in time. And the important things here to look at is at 2025, so we're almost there right now, a month away, 18% wind and solar across the globe on average, and 33% including the hydro, and then 45% by 2035 and 57% including hydro. So some massive change as represented just by the steepness of those graphs. And really, wind has been doing fantastically, but look at the solar. The solar has a huge trajectory. Following on from what does this all mean, following the money, so where are people investing, which really shows that hard decisions are being made right now. So there's the capacity investment scheme that I mentioned before, and that was aimed to cover about 6 gigawatts of variable renewable energy, and that's been oversubscribed to a factor of 5 or 6, so 40 gigawatts. And China, I absolutely love this fact, China added more solar panels in 2023 than the US did in its entire cumulative history. That's staggering. And for anyone that doesn't know that, and they don't need to really publish that, but just an appreciation of the speed of growth and the speed of change, the transformation over there. And look, in other areas, they might be following the same price patterns and signals, but really also the approval side just shows how fast they can really implement this stuff. Also with the US, with the IRA, which was, I think, the largest bill in America's history, which was a huge amount, and that was there was a talk recently, Sol Griffiths talked about being involved with that, and I think originally they were saying it might have up to 300 billion of investment, and it's now over 400 billion of investment from that, and that represents about 280 gigawatts, so that's ridiculous, it's huge. So the potential in general, what I'm getting at, is enormous for Australia and for international markets. It might seem relatively straightforward to get to the gen cost scenarios of 90% with BESS and variable generation, but there's still lots of hard problems. So it might be, I guess, straightforward in terms of planning, but getting it actually occurring on the ground is another matter. So all of those sorts of things need to be worked out. And then to get to 100% or further, because by the time you get to 100%, you've probably solved a lot of those problems, getting to export. The only, I guess, consolation there is that you need to travel the same path. So you still need to do ultra cheap renewables if you're going to try and get to export level. And then just on the right there, that's an interesting tracker from AMO. It's actually the monthly average of renewable energy, as well as for any particular month, it can show you the breakdown. So when it occurred and what that breakdown looked like. So yeah, if anybody's super interested, jump on there and have a look. But really the takeaway from here is that you can see that it's slowly increasing in time. So even month to month that there's build out, it's not just a yearly annual change. So challenges. So I've hinted at this. There's a few challenges and I won't get through all of them. But so the grid upgrade, we've got to get a grid that can actually connect to these things. The connection process itself is something that has been slowly getting harder and harder to achieve, the performance standard. So the grid rollout, which also is a problem because it hasn't changed for a long time. So it hasn't substantially been extended for about 50 years. So any upgrades that we talk about now feels like it's completely new and has never been done before, when in reality, it just hasn't been done for a long time. And because of that, there's lots of parties. So the general community as well as government hasn't really been in a regular communication about this. So also negotiations are potentially more visible due to social media and the mandatory acquisition rights for government, which used to be a backstop. They're meant to support planning, but the use is highly problematic now because of those social media ties. And then really the NIMBYism, that people are really happy for it, but not near them. So they don't want to look at it, they don't want it near them. And that's pretty common for lots of different energy types, but that does make this planning hard. And lastly, just a comment that the rural communities feel like they're sacrificing a lot for the cities, so that they're having to give up a lot. They feel like they've got pressure to concede, but with very little recognition. They feel like it's just another expected thing that the cities want of them. The social licence and community support. So there is anti-wind sentiment out there, but luckily it's generally not in the communities, that's in many of the communities. So I guess it's fairly rare. A lot of the objectors are not in the local communities, they're further away. So we've just had Spices Creek go through the Independent Planning Commission, and I think all the anti-comments were actually more than 50 kilometres away. So some communities are absolutely on board, and how to get them on board, it's critical to get the all the consultation, talking to local hosts, neighbours and the wider community, get them comfortable by being really clear about expectations. And so that's the proceeds, the impacts and the benefits. So they're clear about what does this look like, not just now, not just when we start construction, but in 30 years time. Like, are you still going to be involved? Is this community going to flourish, or is it going to be, you know, a desert? Is there not going to be much here? There's also a lot more research now, so to be able to address concerns of the community, and that's more clearly showing that some of the previous concerns were overstated. So things about noise, there's so many studies now, bird and bat strikes, and I guess importantly that's been done comparatively with other energy types, and things like the whales offshore, which there's so much evidence, but that argument almost seems to not be about the evidence. Lastly, of the challenges is just getting the things out there, getting them built, so port to project. And so that requires, and all of this sounds relatively simple, but I guess because of the size, because of the scale, and because of the number of these wind farms and other renewables being built, there's a lot of activity, and being able to cover that is really hard. So you need transport specialists, you need specialised vehicles, and I've actually got a picture there in the middle, which is a blade transport, a javelin truck. And you need police and other escorts. It's actually different in different states. Some of them are quite onerous, and all of that needs to happen in periods overnight. So very limited windows in major places going out to rural ones. And it's really that nexus of planning and timing and the people required, which might be fine if it's all planned for, but if everybody just assumes they'll be able to access that, it's going to be a problem when it's all happening at once. And probably the only other thing is the image on the right is a complete concept, but so people are even looking at, this is by Radia, a windrunner concept, which is an aeroplane that can land on straight out to site. So you could actually avoid all of the transport issues, but this is still in early concept stage. It might be 10 years away, but there's lots of solutions that might be able to help, but yeah, we've still got a big problem. Tailwinds, and I guess this is some of the things that are helping us do what we do. So the wind turbine evolution. So many people might know this, but I feel like it can't be overstated. Just the increase in size over the last 10 years and longer. So the larger sizes approximately doubled, and that those larger sizes require more spacing. So what that actually means is you get a higher output with less land impact, and so you can still have grazing, and there's turbines maybe every 500 metres, every kilometre, and so that's less impact as well as higher energy output. So that's better for landowners, that's better for the energy prices. And also the higher tower heights have reached a higher elevation, which means higher wind speeds. So as you go higher, there's more wind energy there that you can access. And then also by being bigger, you can have larger rotor blades. And that means your capacity factor, which is your represents the average output, will get better as well. So, and I've got two diagrams there. The top one is the turbine sizing in relation to other significant structures. So you can see from 2005, about the size of the London Eye, so 150 metres, and now we're at the size of basically double, 300 metres, and that gives you larger rotor and higher wind speeds. So in all ways, that's massively better. In terms of solar, so for both wind and solar, the productivity has increased. So both the efficiency, so solar cell efficiency, as well as less materials per output. So there's a lot of things in production and design and research that we've learned. We've also benefited from financial markets, the RECs and the things like the solar rooftops with the STCs. It's been a runaway success. We've now got more than 25% of all households Australia-wide and 20 gigawatts total installed, which represents about 11% of consumption. So that's pretty good for just what residents have put on their own roofs, and it's being able to get certificates that pay out to the 2030 time to help subsidise that. Also, Australia has a big interest in this area. So we've actually provided a lot of R&D that's led to some of the developments with solar cell design. So PERC is a very common one. I think that's about 35% of the solar market at the moment. And that was out of Australian unis and CSIRO, and then some lower cost ones, so perovskite and the printable, which is over at University of Newcastle. And yeah, they've got some installations, I think, down in Lake Cove in Sydney. The other tailwind is the climate action and international leadership. So the Paris Agreement has largely meant that the OECD is moving towards all of these targets in a similar fashion. And also we get the cheapest energy solution from what I showed you with the LCOE before, and we get to reduce climate impact. There's subsequent things out of that, like the air quality and the biodiversity things. Some leading countries are almost there, so they're further down the road. Arguably, some of their mix is easier to achieve. So Norway is at 98.5% by some accounting, and they've got great hydro, and they've done really generous government incentives. So things like electric vehicles being almost half the price of non-electric. And I guess an important thing out of all of this is the working with and supporting other countries and their commitments. So things like for Newcastle coal, it's not so much us having a discussion about how much coal we should sell, it's more about Japan and South Korea actually deciding some of these things, and that directly impacts us. So we might not be able to negotiate anything there. It's more a matter of supporting them with, well, what's their next steps? How do we help them transition? And yeah, what is the benefit or the opportunity out of that? Finally, with BESS, similar with the levelised cost, you can see the in front of the meter is far cheaper than behind the meter. It includes some of the residential stuff. When I was first looking at this, I think it was around about $1,000, and now it's come down to a bit over 100, which is incredible, and it's all in US dollars. But really, the trajectory of this has been fantastic too, and the implications is with any intermittent source or variable source, having the storage suddenly makes everything else make sense. So this getting cheap enough can change a lot of other different things. So really want to leave you with the exciting times that are ahead. It's not like any other time in history. So there's lots of parallels of transitions and changes, but no one has the complete map. So even if we've got good plans, all of this could get pushed one way or another. So I generally subscribe to Sol Griffith's attitude, so that it should be a really exciting time. We've got lots of opportunities, lots of things that can make this really fun. Sol talks about electric jet skis. We might not have them yet, but we've got things like electric skateboards, the e-foils, the drones, some level of self-driving cars, and all of that is achievable because of the battery energy density and the power of the small electric motors. So things like the e-foil on the right there, that it would be really hard to do with a normal combustion engine. And yeah, one of his other things is the different fortunes that could be made out of this. So not only oil, so that's avoided transportation, importing that, and it's a sunk cost. Being part of the battery metals, the grid and industrial costs, so by bringing grid prices down, effectively some of our industry could have a cost benefit over anywhere else because we have such good renewable resources. And then on top, as I alluded to before, whether we get to some sort of export level. So export value add, so doing more in terms of doing secondary and tertiary processing of things like steel or things like hydrogen in whatever form that is, ammonia or whatnot. For export, the pathway is the same, ultra-cheap renewables, so that's still the clear thing that we've got to get to. That's the stepping stone before we even look at anything else. And importantly, what other people might not realise, being engineers, we always talk about things like round-trip efficiency. That still impacts things, but most critical is price. So because renewables are abundant, renewables can be done at scale, it's more about the cost at which you can do it and what time period you can amortise that over. The energy is interesting and contentious at the moment due to it being expensive. Everybody has a story or a bugbear. And I've heard some people talk about that we need it to be boring again. And that's not bad, but I think ideally it should still be exciting. It should be abundant. So like Sol's comment, it should be, if we had really cheap energy, what could we do with this? And it's all those sorts of extra things that maybe you wouldn't do and it couldn't make sense without another business case. But look, if we do this really well, it shouldn't be a problem. Also throwing things into the mix is the AI is getting better at general AGI, so artificial general intelligence. So that's a lot of the general human tasks. And maybe that could help with solving some of these problems. It might be really good at researching different material types, production, manufacturing. Alternatively, in line with that, it actually means that there's a huge energy need. So there's all sorts of data centers popping up now, huge energy demands. And a bit of an anecdotal story is Microsoft is looking to open 3 Mile Island, and they've actually used AI to help them put all of the thousands and thousands of pages of application forms together for that. So, and they're going to change the name, but at the same time, it's just a matter of everybody is panicking and wanting more and more power. So it's a matter of we need lots. It's not even just a matter of transitioning the amount we've got now, it's forecasting to an even greater need in the future. And then lastly, what could change everything is we've got the Trump presidency. It's just happened. Does that mean the IRA will get repealed? Does that turn into something else? Is there too many vested interests that have jumped into it already? So, lastly, I'll leave on this. So there's Renew Beers if anybody's keen. So that's kind of a renewables industry event that we have. Great networking and a bit of industry gossip. You'll hear more stories like some of the stuff that I've said. And we will be late to it tonight, so if you want to join us. So it goes to 11, so you'll still be there before the bar runs dry. But yeah, potentially after this. And also a shout out that the AIE has an AGM this afternoon, so if anybody wants to join the local board, be involved, then please come along. Everything. Thanks.
Okay, well, looks like we're running well ahead of schedule, but we'll hold the questions until after Helen's talk. All right. So, thanks, Micah. That was quite a lot to take in. Yeah. But yeah, well, it's covered so many areas, not just the technical aspects and you know, forecasting and things like that. Yeah, a lot of economics too. Okay, all right. Second speaker today is Dr. Helen Wu from CSIRO, and she'll be speaking about co-optimisation for site location of wind and solar in Australia and beyond. All right, so not just Australia. She works as a early career research fellow at CSIRO, and her specialties are in advanced statistical modelling, machine learning, and time series forecasting at various levels, I presume. So she applies her statistical background to improving energy forecasting and predictive accuracy, and also communicating that with visualization of the outcomes. And she has a PhD from the University of Sydney, and before that, she studied at the National University of Singapore. All right, thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for coming. I'm Helen Wu, and I'm a SEC fellow from CSIRO, and I would like to thank AIE for giving me this opportunity to share our research findings. Today, I'm going to talk about co-optimization of wind and solar energy and intermittency for renewable generator site selection. I would like to begin by acknowledging our Pika people as the traditional owners of the land that we are meeting on today, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. And these slides just highlights the topics I'm going to cover today. I will start with the motivation and talk about the Pareto frontier approach. And then I will show you some renewable resource assessment and comparison results. It is followed by the Western Australia Destination Project. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the future work. Okay, we know that renewable site selection is essential as selecting the optimal site can maximize efficiency, reduce costs, minimize environmental impact, and enhance the project's overall viability and sustainability. In renewable site selection or in the renewable resource assessment itself, the energy output is typically the first consideration, which makes sense because we always want to maximize the energy output. However, site selection is never one single objective problem given the inherent nature of the renewables such as wind and solar. They fluctuate over time in response to the atmospheric changes, which poses a risk known as intermittency. That's the factor we should consider. So we need to think about the trade-off between energy generation and intermittency. And we propose a new multi-objective Pareto frontier approach to identify high-performing renewable generation sites. Before diving into more details about this topic, I would like to talk about the data. We use the data sourced from Bureau of Meteorology, BOM, and the data is called BARA, which stands for Bureau's Atmospheric Regional Real Analysis for Australia. And the data has a very fine spatial resolution of 12 by 12 kilometers and a high temporal resolution of 1 hour, and it spans from 1990 to 2019. With this data, we use the median as a metric for energy output, and we use median absolute difference as a metric for intermittency. And I will give you more details about those two metrics in my next slide. But for now, let's take a look at this scatter plot illustrating the energy output versus the intermittency of solar resource in Australia. For this plot, it basically represents the solar profile of all the grid points in Australia. We have two objectives. We want to maximize the energy output as y-axis and minimize the intermittency as x-axis. And these plots reveal a broad diversity in energy in solar profile in Australia, suggested by the wide dispersion of all the data points, which is good, which means we can really differentiate the good ones and bad ones. We try to identify, for example, just take a look at those 2 points. The one, the lower ones is giving us around 300 watts per square meter energy output at the intermittency level 250. And the one above produces 140 watts per square meter energy more and at the same level of intermittency. If you are the developer, you are going to select between these two, you are definitely going to pick the one on top because at the same level of risk, you are going to have much more energy output. This is how we identify the Pareto frontier. They are the dominant ones in the sense that at the same level of intermittency, it gives you the maximum energy output. And at the same level of energy output, it has the lowest intermittency. We try to find those Pareto frontier points based on all the grid points in Australia and mark them in red color. And we also plot the existing solar farms in green color. And the existing ones are positioned well below the Pareto frontier, suggesting that the energy output could have been significantly improved by selecting the one from the Pareto frontier instead of the existing ones. So I hope this gives you some idea of how to identify those optimal sites by this Pareto frontier approach. And we conduct this analysis for wind and solar separately, and as well as for the combined synergy of wind and solar. So the statistic displayed on the left-hand side represents the two metrics I just mentioned. So in the numerator, median absolute difference from the median is the metric we use for the intermittency, and in the denominator, median reflects the energy output. The choice of those two metrics addresses the highly skewless nature of the underlying distribution. So typically, wind speed follows Weibull distribution, and solar irradiance can be modeled by a beta distribution, and those two distributions are highly skewed. And the ratio between these two is referred to as relative coefficient of variation, which is a single metric useful to capture the balance between intermittency and energy output. However, since it's just a single value, it is not sufficient for our bi-objective optimization problem. At the map on the right-hand side, that's color scheme basically just represents the RCOV, which is not that useful. We try to identify those Pareto frontier of all the breakpoints for the synergy of wind and solar in Australia by optimization, and mark them in green color on this map. So you can see they are scattered across Australia with concentration in Queensland and some clusters in New South Wales and Victoria, as well as some parts of southern, western and northern Australia. This is good, which means we have a lot of options across Australia. However, some of the points is not economically feasible due to their remoteness or inaccessible nature. For example, the one in the middle of nowhere in Northern Territory. So we want to repeat this analysis, focusing on the breakpoints in renewable energy zones. So the integrated system plan by EMO proposed the renewable energy zones within NAME network for the renewable project development. And for this analysis, we limit our assessment to the grid points in renewable energy zones, and we try to identify those optimal sites in renewable energy zones. And once again, we can see that most of these points are scattered or primarily in Queensland, with additional clusters in Victoria and New South Wales, and some along the coastline of South Australia and Tasmania. So well done, Queensland. Now, how can we quantify this improvement? We try to pair the existing ones with the one on the Pareto frontier in the renewable zones. For example, if we pair the White Rock solar farm in New South Wales with the one in Queensland, we find that both of them are at the same level of intermittency, but the one in Queensland is going to give us much more energy output. By calculating the difference, we find that the proposed wind-only and solar-only sites show an average energy increase of 9% for solar based on 67 sites, and an average energy increase of 28% for wind based on 50 sites for the same level of intermittency as compared to the existing generation site. If you are interested in the results, you can find them in our paper. The results basically demonstrate the importance of preliminary analysis and strategic planning in renewable development, renewable project development to achieve optimal outcomes. And we take one step further to look into the offshore areas, because offshore wind and solar are expected to play an increasingly important role in global energy transition. And this colored area is called economic exclusive zones of Australia. For this analysis, we try to use the same approach, and this map, probably not very clear from here, we can see those green dots are identified as the optimal site for the synergy of wind and solar offshore. And they also meet the constraint of within 50 kilometers of the coast, and median energy output exceeding 100 watts per square meter to make it economically feasible. Once again, we can see those locations are scattered along the coastline of Queensland, with isolated one in South Australia and Tasmania. So well done, Queensland. And now let's move on to our next project called Desalination Plant in Western Australia. For this project, we try to assess the feasibility of a standalone desalination plant powered by a hybrid system of wind, solar, battery storage, and possibly a diesel generator for backup. A techno-economic analysis was conducted, and for each location, the Pareto frontier results were produced through optimization. So for this plot is basically show you the Pareto frontier of this particular location with latitude minus 26.45 and longitude 113.895. And with this problem, we have two objectives. We want to minimize the levelized cost of energy, LCOE, as y-axis, and maximize the reliability level as or the supply reliability as x-axis, because we are talking about some off-grid project and 100% reliability cannot always be guaranteed. So we assume a flat load of 100 kilowatts for this desalination plant, but this approach is adaptable to any other load profile. And we also assume a 30-year lifespan of this project aligned with our meteorological data. And what we can observe from this plot is that LCOE is very low when the reliability level is low, especially between 70%. LCOE is just around 5 cents per kilowatts hour. However, it increases dramatically after when the reliability level increases, especially between 90% to 100%, which is reasonable because it's costly for such hybrid system with high renewable penetration to achieve 100% reliability. We also produce this distribution plot of COE at various reliability level from 60% to 100%. So if you take a look at the plots on the right-hand side, from the far left of this plot, you can see that brownish peak distribution, that is LCOE at reliability level 60%, and you can, because it's quite peaked, you cannot really differentiate bad location and good location from that kind of distribution. However, as reliability level increases, especially the one up from the far right side, the blue curve, the distribution is significantly dispersed, and that suggests a substantial difference for more or less favorable location. So this spread allows us to differentiate the high performing site and low performing site. And we also create the LCOE map together with the solar, wind, and battery capacity map at various reliability level. So for example, we are looking at 100% reliability here. It's very clear that LCOE is consistent across the basin areas. However, there are two regions with particularly high LCOE, one in southwestern coastal areas, another one in the northern part of Kimberley region. The increase in that COE is attributed to the higher solar capacity in those regions for the hybrid system, possibly due to weak wind resource. And we know that battery capacity is highly correlated with battery storage. The battery storage is highly correlated with solar capacity. Those two factors just drive up LCOE. Okay, and then let me talk about some of our future work. There are so many opportunities to explore with the data. So one of our goals is to conduct this weather data validation using the observation from wind and solar farms. With the updated version of BARA, which is referred to as BARA 2, we now have access to more detailed and consistent historical weather data. And you can see from this plot here, this figure here, it highlights the coverage of BARA data. It basically covers Australia and the Southeast Asia region. And the original BARA or BARA 1 spans from 1990 to 2019. BARA 2 extends its coverage from 1980 to the present, which provides us with much more recent data. This is especially useful for validation because we know most of the SCADA data from AMO of those solar and wind farms, they date from 2019 onward. And we are also interested in comparing the performance of different weather data sets especially whether the MERA-2 from NASA or BARA-1 or BARA-2 is most suitable for the analysis in Australia. Where there are some research on this topic, our focus will be on whether there are some systematic bias correction factor related to different locations and topographies. Okay, our analysis can be easily extended to Southeast Asia region. For example, we can generate this renewable resource assessment map for Indonesia, as shown here. In fact, we've received some inquiries from international agencies regarding collaboration on potential renewable resource mapping in those countries. Last but not least, we are going to work on the grid collected optimization. We aim to create a scenario in which all the existing coal-fired plants are retired by 2030. In that scenario, we are going to select co-locating wind and solar farms from each renewable energy zones, and based on our approach and some constraints. And the key question we want to answer is what are the optimal capacity of wind and solar at each site, and how would we size the battery energy storage system so that the renewable network can replace the existing ones effectively with reduced LCOE. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. So we'll have the in-person questions first, and I think, Greg, you have a few questions that you've collected from online. But yeah, so because there are 150 attendees online, could you just please state your name and affiliation if you have one before you ask your question? So yes, please, who would like to go first? Chris?
Thanks, Richard. It's Chris Taylor from the Institute of Energy Newcastle branch. Just a question of the cheapness of wind and solar that Micah was talking about. Does that include the removal and replacement of the current assets over time?
If you're looking, say, 50 years, yeah, sure. Yeah, the LCOE, if they're forecasting out that far, would include.
Okay, finished. All right. Yes.
Hello, I'm Davina from Telstra Energy. Question for Dr. Helen Wu. Have you done any analysis on the time of day that wind is blowing? Because we tend to maximize the performance at one particular site. But if we had a more holistic strategy where wind is blowing at one part at a particular time of day, and then that stops, and then we have another wind farm pick up when that goes down. Is there any analysis you've done?
I haven't done that, but it could be a very good research question for me to do next. Yeah.
Chris. Okay, right, one more question from Chris.
Micah, we're seeing more blowback from rural communities about having power lines through, things like that. What is Squadron doing to facilitate that process to actually get these things done without conflict in regional areas?
Yeah, look, I guess part of what I was saying before about the clear communication, so talking to them about it beforehand, the renewable energy zones has been a really useful thing for them to do rather than a scattergun approach across everywhere in Australia. So looking at where the transmission hubs make sense and then supporting those projects in those areas. And that way there can also be deeper and earlier discussion with those communities in the reses. So yeah, we do that. We also do some community benefit sharing. So with any of our projects, they're local community can actually buy into the project themselves. So rather than them feeling like it's imposed upon them, that it's an opportunity for them to be part of it. So yeah, we are looking at different things to support both the community as well as part of the transmission upgrade.
All right. Hey.
Hello, my name is Jo Lynch. I'm with Realliance, working on a campaign to establish local energy hubs in renewable energy zones, which are service and outreach centres where communities can get an answer to any question about renewables that they might have, mostly focused on household electrification, community energy projects, and then large-scale projects. I'm familiar with Squadron's excellent work and leading practice that you just described. I just was wondering, like, what do you think? What would you like the general public to know, about the renewable energy shift? What the myths or the misconceptions or,
Sure. Well, yeah, look, I alluded to a bunch of them. I think there is a bunch of misconceptions about things about the impacts and drilling into that, and that it's not just an impact or nothing. It's actually, this is all time dependent. We've got a lot of aging fleet of coal-fired power stations that we've already extended the life, and it's not going to be done further. There's lots of private industry that has already kind of decided not to support that financially. So it's a matter of how do we plan and gracefully change this, rather than, if we don't do that and there is resistance, we will get to reliability problems and then band-aid solutions. We might have emergency storage. Like, it gets more and more expensive the worse transition plan that we have. So that part of it, as well as, I guess, it'd be great if there was more leadership. So things like what you're talking about, where the local community can actually find out more and be part of the transition, so that they can look at getting an EV themselves. A lot of them would have solar already on their rooftop, but thinking about these next steps and how they can be part of it and benefit from it. So see those energy bills go down, which would be great.
Yes, we have quite a lot of time for questions, but we'll go for Sam. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sam Meller from Beyond Zero Emissions. Helen, congratulations on your research. That looks really hard. But what I got is the hotspot is Queensland, and Queensland is, being a Queenslander myself originally, it's a really hotspot for biodiversity and nature as well. So, and I think that's part of the conflict that's coming up with social licenses at the moment. Is there an opportunity with your research to add in more layers and looking at the biodiversity, and how can we maximise the commercial, like the best places commercially for renewable energy, as well as protecting nature and having nature corridors, because we understand that a lot of our native species are already under stress and migrating from climate impacts.
Thanks for your question. Actually, you've answered your own question. We try to add more layers. So our approach is like bottom-up approach. So for now, it's just energy resource assessment, and we need to add more layers to this analysis in order to select the best sites for the whole community. Yeah.
I'll probably add to that, because it is an active area of research to add to that, so that taking in considerations of social license to operate, but also ecological impact is an area of CSIRO's research we're doing with this area, with Helen.
Thanks. Ross Dawson from AIE, and this is for Micah. Relating to wind power, there's a lot of public discussion about various negatives of wind power, and on your side I saw a lady holding a banner saying wind power makes me sick. But there's also the discussion of bird strikes and noise, and offshore there's whales. Where is there sort of definitive data that people can go to that they can trust on real research and factual data on all these things, rather than the just word of mouth type stories? And that's I see as the real problem. Is people they're just really repeating what they've heard, no factual data. So it's got to be a trusted source and very factual.
Yeah.
Does that sort of really exist anywhere that you can go to?
Look, not one single place. I people being in an echo chamber and hearing certain things and it just continues from that is probably part of a wider discussion about miscommunication. And so, yeah, it's that thing of people being educated to check their sources and then go do it. Whereas in a lot of social media, that doesn't necessarily happen. So they hear something, they feel something, and then it just continues from there. So yeah, there is no silver bullet, and I think there should be more places that are verified, maybe even something in more broadly in media and journalism about knowing good data sources and what you can trust, that things are less biased. But yeah, there's no easy answer there, but there's still some fantastic research from lots of universities around the world of things that they've done already, as well as, I guess, helping to educate people by making it experiential. So things like people hearing about wind turbine noise, going and listening to recordings of it in a simulation. So seeing those things and hearing it for themselves might be the thing that changes it, rather than if they're not going to go look up papers and listen that way, having a good way to disseminate information in a different way that's easy to absorb.
If I can just add to that. Say, for instance, if I did a Google search on bird strikes from wind turbines,
yep,
I don't think it'd be very helpful in terms of getting trustworthy facts.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it depends what's been happening, but which way the results go. So, but there has been, good metadata studies. So bringing together lots of different farms that have been operating for a long time, especially in Europe that has a longer history, and looking at the strikes, and they've found that generally it was overstated from early predictions. So it's actually lower than expected. And then also, I guess this whole piece that I was talking about before, that really, it's not a case of kill those birds or not kill those birds. It's actually, there's that some bird strike associated with wind turbines, but it's actually much higher if you look at things like traditional coal-fired power stations, and also if you look at things like feral cats. So if we're serious about the biodiversity threats and species protection, we also need to be looking at this from a holistic view of going, okay, well, don't just approve or not approve one particular technology type. If this is an issue, let's make sure we're reducing it as soon as possible, and we're also protecting the most important parts. Yep.
Alec Roberts from Cleaners. Micah, just you mentioned in there about in your tailwinds, you talked about improvements air quality, which makes sense, and also improvements in biodiversity. Could you put some more detail behind that?
Yeah, look, so that's not directly impact from construction with projects. That's more about if we're doing better with climate, we will have less species impacts. So if we can control the temperatures, if we have less other impacts, so kind of looking at life cycle assessment outcomes of some of this, that you'll end up being better off that way.
Yeah, and Helen, I was just wondering if you've considered the impact into your studies on variable demand. So you've got a great thing there where you're identifying what's the best bang for your buck, but you've also got to look at what is the demand for for that electricity on those certain times of day, and whether you've looked into including that as a factor as well.
Yes, for our future work, especially the one grid collected optimization, we will look into that aspect. So we are going to get the real demand data from EMO and to see how we can make this renewable network effectively replace the existing ones. Yeah.
It might be a bit strange, but so a couple of things. The intermittency. Yeah. So that's also on a watts per square meter basis. How is that measured? How do you see it? Daily profile.
It's hourly profile of the PARA data.
Okay.
So we calculated that wind power density from the wind speed, and we have the solar irradiance recording.
Okay. So it represents total like wind energy variability.
Yes.
Yep. For every single location. That's cool.
Yes.
And also you mentioned MERA 2 and the BARA 2 data set.
Yes.
Have you looked at ERA 5 or 6?
So it's ERA 5.
Sorry?
ERA 5.
Yeah. And 6, I think, is now in early stages of testing.
Basically, this BARA is nested within ERA 5. It's the regional real analysis data which caters for Australia, which means it's better than ERA itself.
Yeah, resolution.
Yeah, yes, fine. Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Okay, I'll continue with that. But Greg has two questions online.
Yes, I'd just like to cover a couple of questions online. There's a couple of comments in there, but we'll pass them on to the speakers as we go. First one is more of a feedback rather than a question. It's from Rohan Zauna from Jacobs. It says, "Hi Helen, great presentation. For your desal case, there is another potential independent variable to allow an oversized desal plant and a tank. You can co-optimize that to an alternative least cost of water point." Just
Thank you for this suggestion.
and to the question comes from Rhett. Rhett asks if Northern Territory Solar Gen can be connected to Singapore, why can't it be connected to East Coast Grid? And it's not anyone specific, but it may be Helen or it could be Micah. Who'd like to answer?
Look, yeah, I'm no grid engineer, but transmission costs are really big. So as well as actually Beyond Zero Emissions, when they came up with their, what was it called? The Super Network plan? Super Grid. Yeah, and there was questions about that of, well, if you've got a really good spatial resource, if you can connect some of that, does it make sense? But connecting WA to East Coast of Australia is huge. Like, yeah, basically America has done it because everybody lives in between, but our population doesn't cover it that way. It's a really expensive outcome.
So, and this is Sam from BZE again.
Why the business case works for Sun Cable is because the cost of electricity in Singapore is so high.
That was quick. And maybe copper string and Mount Isa, similar arguments. Yeah. So is that the end of the online questions, Greg?
Yeah, there is one more question. I think it's coming actually. Somebody just pasted something in. So there's a question here from Joe Lane. The question is to Micah. Is the turbine structural wind tolerance keeping up with increases in rotor lengths, or is the height growth going predominantly into lower wind areas, e.g. class 3 areas? And then there's a second question. But
yep, sure. If they already know about the class areas, then I will give a technical answer. And so that's most of the turbines now are special class, which means that the OEMs, the suppliers of the turbines, are building them specifically for the areas. There's a huge amount of research in terms of turbulence intensity, which is the gustiness of the wind, and that really is about how strong those rotor blades need to be. So to be guaranteed for 30 or 35 years, they do need to be really sure about it. But then turbulence intensity, it's at 15 meters a second or higher. So it's a very small sample set. And so you need multi-year approach to really understand that. But that research means that a lot of the costs can come down. So it's generally always worth going higher. Part of the biggest issues is where you have the difference in wind speeds at the top and the bottom. So as you get higher, that actually becomes less of an issue. You get lower turbulence intensity. So on the whole, it's worth it. And the material science of what the turbine blades are made out of it can totally work. It's now about the cost effectiveness of building taller towers and approvals.
thanks, Micah. There is a follow-up to that. So if I can ask that one, it's also from Joe Lane. What are your expectations for the ongoing / future pace and limits to increase in size of wind turbines?
That's really interesting, and I could probably talk about it for hours. So, I mean, the simple thing is what we've seen over the last 10 years, if you draw a straight line, that's amazing. Now, it may not get to be a straight line. So you never know these things until we're past it. But even if we continue at some level of increase, even if the rate of increase was decreasing, so it tailed off a little bit, it's still really impressive the levels that we're getting to. And it means that it can be cost effective in all sorts of places because you are getting to higher heights. So that means naturally higher wind speeds, larger rotor blades, better capacity factors. So it can be more cost effective, but then it's the construction side of how cheap can you build this? What can you get approved? And look, behind the meter sort of stuff, if you could, you don't need separate approvals like on some mine sites, you could get away with some amazingly cheap construction, but it's, yeah, maybe not the same thing. Maybe it doesn't need to go for 30, 35 years.
Ross Dawson. The levelised cost of electricity in the graph you had, Micah, the diagram. I wonder if you... Sorry?
Was that Lazard or Gen cost?
The gen cost.
Yep.
Could you go back and talk about that a bit more? Because that's a really key issue, isn't it? When you're looking at the different forms of energy generation.
Yep.
And the current and projected future costs. Just wondering if you can talk about that a bit more, because that's really a absolute key issue.
Yep.
The economics of
Absolutely.
The different things.
Yep.
If you bring it up and talk a bit more about it, and really how how they're derived and what it includes in, for instance, cradle to grave, new transmission costs. Remediation.
Yep. And look, I'm no expert, and that's actually maybe something that CSIRO, I don't know how close Greg is to that work, the assumptions involved. But look, I guess I presented a few different sources, so Lazard, which is American, and GenCost Australian. The assumptions that go into it would highly reflect the pricing. But having said that, I guess every year they revisit this and go into more detail about what's involved, what the costs are, how it's looking across the industry. So some of the bumps in the road, like from COVID, there was recently with wind onshore, that there was price increases that were kind of unexpected and felt by everyone in the industry. All of those sorts of things are taken into account, but I'm not sure about the difference in assumptions over time. So especially for all of this stuff, looking 30 to 35 years out, we should plan that way. But like I said about all of those things that are coming that might completely change the game, I think we should plan as conservatively as possible, but still being ready to pivot. So basically have a good plan for cheap power, but having some backup plans to make sure that we can cover a few bases.
Okay, all right. My only response to that one too, Ross, is that short answer is I can't make a response on behalf of anyone for GenCost. Our Paul Graham would be the appropriate person to do that. Maybe at a future talk we might be able to hear from all around GenCost. He's a very popular subject at the moment.
Okay, all right. So I have Richard Bean from University of Queensland. I have questions for Helen. You mentioned ERA 5 and ERA 6 from the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting. Are you going to be able in the future to, you talked about getting scatter data from AEMO for are you going to in the future be able to say that
validation
for wind and solar, this is doing, I get able to rank them like this, like ERA 5 is best, then Barra 2, then Barra, then Mera 2 in that order?
There has been some research on this topic. I think there's one from some research group in Monash. Right. They somehow prove that in terms of performance, using the real SCADA data, Barra 2 is the best as well as for wind.
For wind?
Yeah, for wind. And from my understanding, there's no existing research for this, but I can do that.
Yep. And obviously the AEMO ISP is working on a half-hourly basis, whereas all the data you're talking about is on an hourly basis. Yeah. Is that right? So are there any data sets on a half-hourly basis now? Is there?
We are updated. Emma now provide 5 minutes settlement.
Oh yeah. But no, I mean the numerical weather prediction, the NWP. Oh, okay. Is that on a half-hourly basis?
Oh, so for Barra?
Oh, anything.
Not aware of data.
So it's all hourly.
Yeah, it's hourly.
Yeah. Okay. And so you're just interpolating the solar farm or the wind farm from the nearest 4 points or something like that.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, we still have a lot of time. So, Chris.
Chris Taylor again. Question to Micah. You're doing a great job with solar and wind, but as we get more and more moving to solar and wind, storage becomes a bigger and bigger issue. What is Squadron doing as far as storage, or looking at as far as storage?
Yep. Well, so I guess we've got the Port Kembla Energy Terminal, so that's for potential gas. We do have a Dubbo firming plant, so we are looking at these things, as well as we've got some storage options that are looking to be co-located with some of our sites. So no Waratah super battery scale stuff right now, but potentially with some of our other projects down the line.
Anybody else have any further questions?
Brad Wolfgang from CSIRO, just an engineer here at CSIRO. Probably one for Helen. You discussed the irradiance maps that you put up was one of the very first inputs that went into the maps for ideal locations for solar farms. How does those maps change with climate change in general? And is it going to change enough to actually relocate solar farms in the future?
I think the question was in reference to your irradiance maps that you
Yes.
presented earlier.
Yeah.
And with the impact of climate
Yeah.
change, how do you see that these irradiance maps might change, and would they change enough
To
that
relocate.
therefore you would have to relocate solar plant?
That's a very interesting research question. And I think we are going to look at this climate change projection data to answer that question. And within CSIRO, we actually have this CCAM data set with 100-year climate change projection. And we're going to use that to see whether there are some systematic and significant shifts in terms of the solar energy, and to answer that question.
It's certainly an active very, very interest, not just in CSIRO. We know, aware of other groups, say at UNSW, who are looking at that. Understanding those future impacts over the next 10, 20, 50 or more years is important. It's a long research and a great research question.
Okay. Does anybody else have? Oh, yes. There's someone in the middle here. I'll just come around. Pass the microphone over.
Rob Rowe from Hunter Jobs Alliance. In a previous life, I used to sell wind turbines, the domestic side ones, where we used to measure the output in kilowatts. And the way to explain the necessity for tower height was simply refer people back to their childhood days of flying kites. When you fly a kite, the difficulty is getting rid of the turbulence at low speed. And then eventually the thing gets up in the air and it's absolutely stationary and boring because you've got steady quality air. And I was able to get that across to people who bought domestic wind turbines, that the height was absolutely critical because they knew what the turbulence was about because they'd flown kites as kids. Thank you.
Probably just a further comment, and everybody probably realises, but we're not just looking for high energy. So there is high energy in places that can be quite turbulent. What we want is as high wind speed as possible, but as invariable as possible. So we want it to be nice and consistent, as little of that turbulence that I was talking about before. Often we do detailed modelling, so CFD modelling, to try and represent some of those eddy currents that might occur, especially with the topography. So if that's happening, likely in some of the large scale mapping exercises, it looks like there's a lot more energy than in reality can be achieved, because a lot of that might be turbulent, so it's not suitable. So you really need to make sure that, I guess, you model those things well before you decide to go to build it.
Okay. Yep. Any further questions? Or yes, we can. Maybe I think that does seem to be it. So let's thank our speakers for that marathon question. And we'll have the AGM.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone joining us online and everyone who joined us in person. Hope to see you again.